Your parents had a complex relationship with drugs and alcohol. I'm going to read you back what you've written to me.
Yep.
You said, I don't think they necessarily tried to hide the pot smoking or drinking. I just thought every household was like this, which created these blurred lines between right and wrong. What do you remember from that time in your life?
Yeah, so Mum was 17 when she first fell pregnant with me. So Dad would have been sort of mid to early 20s, I would say. I think, obviously these were kids having kids. I don't necessarily think it's a negative, but I don't think that they really had the opportunity to do a lot of the groundwork and mature and develop and sort of grow. Mum had a little bit of notoriety about her, so she was an absolute menace. I think she was going out from about sort of 12 or 13.
Did she grow up in Norfolk too?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so she's born and bred. Dad's originally from Sydney, so he grew up in Redfern before Redfern.
Oh my goodness.
Before
That's close.
Redfern became Redfern.
Yeah.
So that was in Housing Commission years ago. So she was born and bred over there. And yeah, I think when she first had me, I don't know whether she was fully sort of ready to have kids. I think that she always held a lot of maternal energy in her. I think that in some case, when I look at it, I think it was her sole purpose to be a mother. But definitely the pace didn't really slow down when she first had kids. And I think we definitely had a fair bit of exposure, me and my siblings. I probably had the highest degree of it, I would say.
You're the eldest?
Yeah, I'm the eldest. Yeah. So I think even within the first 7 days of me being born, I was already staying with my grandmother. Mum's sort of pace, it didn't really slow down. It kind of sort of kept up a little bit. We always grew up with sort of smoking and drinking. It was never something that was really sort of pushed away. I don't know whether it was just to try and give us this sense that it wasn't as taboo. I just thought every household had a billy in the cupboard. Like that's just what I thought was sort of normal. And I think when you're in the thick of it, you probably don't really understand a lot of it.
Was that common for Norfolk Island?
Yeah, I think it was a lot more common than what I thought. I think Norfolk probably had a fair bit of influence there with drugs and alcohol. I think anybody that grows up in regional areas, I think that they can attest to that. I think that it's something that's just sort of ingrained and embedded into a lot of these places, but it's probably not something that we talk about a huge amount. Like it's kind of a bit hush-hush. Yeah, so what sort of happens behind closed doors, you keep that behind closed doors. So
yeah. Do you remember when you first drank alcohol?
Yeah, so it would have been around about sort of 14 or 15. I think that's probably when the partying started to pick up. Mum and Dad were probably a little bit more supportive with it than what most parents were. I don't think they necessarily wanted to have a huge amount of discipline there.
At the age of 17, you fell in love with a man. Zeak, did you know you were gay from birth?
I think it's probably one of those things that you obviously know that there's a bit of a truth there inside, but it's never something that you sort of brought to the surface. I was never open about it. That partially probably had to do with the fact that Norfolk didn't really create that safe space. I think it's a lot of small towns, but Norfolk had this added layer of complexity where, because it was built on really traditional cultural values and because there wasn't a huge amount of queer representation in the community, it just wasn't really something that I was open about talking about. I didn't come out until I moved to Queensland.
Moved away.
Yeah.
So you fall in love with this man or this boy because he was around the same age as you. You were in similar friendship groups. Is that correct?
Yeah. So he would have been maybe a few years older than me. We had a pretty sort of close-knit group of friends at the time. I would have been about 17, 16, 17. We managed to source a bit of MDMA. We ended up at a house one night and decided to take it. At this point, the feelings had probably already started to develop. I could definitely feel that there was a bit of a attraction there, and I think that because I was still 17, everything still felt really intense and exciting, and I was still probably trying to suppress it a little bit. When we did MDMA, that was actually the first night that we had ever hooked up. It was, MDMA is the love drug. So it was just this confession, I guess, that had sort of happened. And I think, obviously, because I'd already had those emotions about, obviously him, once obviously I took MDMA, everything else was so much more heightened. It's like I created this like obsession with that feeling, because I think I was already, like, it just felt really validating for me, because I think I started to obviously work out my prerogatives and, who I loved and what I loved, and to then have that MDMA sort of interlaced with it, everything was just so much more intense.
Like fireworks, right? I could imagine.
Yeah.
The first time taking MD and the first time kissing a man, I could imagine you thinking, oh my God, this is the best feeling in the world and I always want to do this. Do you think it kind of triggered something for you to keep taking MDMA to try and chase that high?
Confidently, it was the catalyst. It was almost like I affiliated that feeling of MDMA with that same feeling of being with another person. And I think that that's where it sort of created this little bit of a chase with it.
Do you start taking more drugs and drinking even more to try and add a layer to this mask that you're holding up?
I don't think the drinking and the drug taking created an artifice or a character. I've said to everybody that I think gays operated at such a high frequency as it is. So the moment that we fuel it, it's just our personality on steroids.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I become just a sort of a little bit more of an outgoing version of who I already was. Yeah.
You were 19 and considered yourself a high-functioning alcoholic when you were working a corporate job in Brisbane. Describe those times to me.
Yeah, so this was the first time that I sort of stepped into Brisbane, and I think separating from Norfolk and coming into that felt like NYC. It felt like the Big Apple. So I kind of, once I started to get into the sort of corporate sort of environment, it just started to completely blow this lifestyle out. So I think in a lot of corporate jobs, especially in the city, there's a massive drinking culture. You look at the events, look at the after work. So I would have been going out maybe sort of 4 to 5 nights out of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And this wasn't just a few casual drinks. This was pretty much draining my account to the point where I was obliterated, and then essentially just do it again.
After this period, when do things start going south? I've read, hey, you get done for drug possession, there's an overdose. Talk me through it.
So I went out with a group of friends one night and I got out the side of an Uber. The moment I got out, there was 2 undercover police officers and they'd come up with a torch and put it straight in my eyes and said that, look, your pupils aren't dilating, mate. Are you on anything?
Also, stepping out of an Uber and being confronted with that, I think even as a sober person, I'd be like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
No, you're okay. So got out of the Uber. The moment that they put the torch on my pupils and said, look, they're not dilating, is, are you on anything? And at that point, because I think I was still fairly naive, I didn't really understand probably where I could sort of push it or what my rights were. So I had a bag of cocaine that was in my wallet, ended up getting that seized, plus my phone was taken as well. A few months later, I went to court for it and got done for drug possession. But because it was my first charge, I had a drug diversion. So there was no criminal conviction. It was nothing that was,
Was that event enough to scare you a bit and stay off partying, or did that not hinder you at all?
No, I just continued. It just, that probably should have been a point where I had a bit of a reevaluation on it, but the moment I walked out of that courtroom, I was back on it. Yeah.
Describe the next few months or years to me until you started kind of seeing how damaging your behaviour started to get.
Yeah, so it's so difficult. Like what I said to you, that I feel like I shut a lot of those years out. It was a bit of a trauma response where, like, I talked to friends that I used to like hang out with, and even when they talk to me, I can't. It's like my body's rejecting it. I can't. Yeah.
I remember when I was reading what you wrote to me, and I resonated so much with what you said about sitting there and hearing about the things that you've done, and everyone's kind of saying it in a real jovial manner, and you're sitting there just filled with so much shame and suppressed memories. Does that still happen to you today, where you sit there and hear about things that you did in your past, thinking?
Even still sitting here right now.
Really?
Yeah. I think I tried to almost separate that version of myself. So it was almost, I think the shame and the guilt probably just overwhelms me a little bit with it. Yeah. I mean, I still see, like, I carry so much of who I was and who I am now. You know, I can still feel that there's that bit of addictive personality.
Zeak, at what age were you when you overdosed?
It would have been 20 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, 20 or 21. At this point, I had been on a bit of a bender. So I'd been already going for about sort of 2 or 3 days at this point, and it was that sort of sick feeling in your stomach. I ended up on a night out, and I was in one of the clubs, and all I remember is just completely slipping, just fell. Woke up, I'd ended up getting taken from the chaplains in one of, like, the clubbing precinct in Brisbane, and ended up there, and it was just overconsumption. Like, I'd been going for days. I think I'd managed to filter through a bag. I would have taken, probably count on one hand how many caps I'd managed to do across those days, and just copious amounts of alcohol. Yeah.
So where are we at in the timeline? You've had a drug overdose, you've been done with drug possession, and these don't slow you down at all.
No.
How many years was it until you started to realise that you had a problem?
I would have started to go out when would have been about 15. So I think it was about 22 is when I started to have a bit of a realisation. I think even in the thick of it, I wasn't naive to it. I could see the behaviour, and I could see the patterns in what I was doing, and just the aftermath and the damage that it was creating. But I think there wasn't really anything that was driving that decision to stop. I wasn't, like, at no point did I think, okay, I really need to start to strip this back. There was a few points where I did slow it down, and I did sort of go sober, but it was for short stints.
And it tricks your brain into thinking, I don't have a problem then.
Yeah.
If I can stop, I will stop.
Yeah.
You were 22 when you decided to go sober after your 22nd birthday. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What was your mindset during that time in order, like, why then?
Yeah. I think leading up to my 22nd birthday, I'd already started a bit of a rebirth. I think it was definitely, it was on the cards. I could sort of feel that it was happening. And when I went out on my 22nd birthday, I just completely overdid it. I obliterated myself. I'd completely blacked out, and the next morning, I quite literally just made the decision. I said, right, this is it.
You're 22. Does your friendship group change drastically after making that decision?
The moment that I went sober, I probably disassociated from a lot of that. So a lot of that sort of friendship group, naturally there was a bit of sort of space or distance that was created there. And I think once I did go sober and there was a bit more of a focus on it, I originally, when I went sober, I thought I needed to just completely pull myself out of any social setting. I just felt like I was a bit more fragile than what I was. So I didn't want to step into anything like that where I kind of felt that there was a bit more risk or, yeah. So when I did start to go sober, I started to, like, my friendship group started to change a little bit. They were a little bit more wholesome. Yeah.
So what do weekends look like for you now?
Compared to what it did a few years ago? Yeah. Look, one of the big differences, I think, when you do go sober is just the cash flow. It's that money management, being able to afford to be able to do things that I probably wouldn't have been able to do 4 or 5 years ago just because of where I was putting it. So now, if I kind of, as a bit of a, not justification, but as a bit of a dopamine hit now, if I want to go and spend $40 on a pastry and a coffee at Agnes, then I'll do that, completely no issues at all.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's so much better than 350
bag,
on a bag. Yeah.
And what about your relationship? So I know I'm rewinding a little bit here, but when you were growing up, you were closeted. When did you fully come out?
Yeah, I would have been 18 when
Okay.
I'd fully come out. I'd spoken to my mum, just called her, I think it was a Monday night. Funnily enough, I'd done MDMA. It was a Monday, and at that point, you know, everything's open space.
You had a
sort
coming
of
to
walk into
Jesus
it.
moment.
Yeah, massively. So I pretty much just called her and I said to her, hey, look, I'm going to go out on Friday night on a date with a boy. And she pretty much just moved past the conversation like it was nothing. I think that she probably knew a fair bit. She could definitely pick up that there was a bit of that sort of energy, a bit of that feminine energy. Yeah.
Since getting sober, you've really started to see people for who they are and perhaps the role that they have played in your life, Zeak. You wrote to me about your mum and dad and how you feel quite disconnected from them now. Can we talk about that?
Yeah. So I think part of the process with sobriety, I think it has this level of clarity that's attached to it that's undescribable. I think you lose a little bit of that innocence and that naiveness. And I think when I looked back, instead of coming out of the childhood, obviously I never really seen it as where that sort of right or wrong was with my parents. They've always been really codependent with drugs and alcohol. It was something that was sort of used to regulate their emotions. I think mum was probably a little bit more high functioning. Dad was probably where it was a little bit more difficult because I think a little bit more mental health issues there. And I think, again, interlaced with the pot smoking, it just created this real volatile environment with it. I mean, we were kids and the first thing that we'd ask mum in the afternoon was what mood's dad in today, just because we were really scared. And we knew that when they didn't have pot, it was just a completely different playing field to walk into at home. So I think when I went sober, I probably lost a bit of that innocence, and I had a really different perspective on them and just the behaviour and the codependency and what they were doing. And I mean, the relationship was still there. There was still a fair bit of space, and I think that's definitely really natural, especially with us, you know, living in different locations.
Totally.
As well.
How is your relationship now with them?
Because I've done so much work and because there's been so much healing for me, when I look at them now, and I kind of had to give this same perspective to my siblings so that they kind of understood how I've been able to separate myself a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't look at them as parents.
Yeah.
I don't see them as a support system anymore. I kind of I see two people that I don't think that they ever really worked through, obviously, a lot of their own sort of trauma. And I think that where I hold a little bit of resentment is what parents don't understand is that kids are a product of their environments. Every decision, action and move that you make as a parent, your kids absorb that. We're sponges. So for me, the way that they sort of conditioned it and the way that they sort of behaved, it had a massive impact on us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were 22 months sober and then you lapsed.
Yeah.
Talk me through your thought process. Talk me through the day. How did the day start? Because you don't wake up as a sober person and go, today I'm going to drink. It kind of springs up on you.
Yeah. So I was emceeing for a wedding, and when I sort of walked into it, I was already really nervous. I wanted to be able to sort of keep that sort of high energy, but then I also still wanted to be able to bring enough personality into it and still not have that, you know, that sort of sweaty sort of hands from public speaking and things.
Of course.
So I had like a little bit of champagne throughout the night, and I still managed to keep everything fairly controlled. It was a bit of once I'd sort of moved past that, a few of the events that had happened afterwards, I had a few drinks across like a few dinners and things. The moment I had a drink, my first thought process was, right, let's get a bag. And that was after 22 months. I thought that I created that control and being able to, you know, regulate and moderate the drinking and things like that. But it's just that addictive personality. It's like the moment that you have it, and I tried to explain this feeling to somebody else, but I couldn't. The moment that you've done any stimulants, when you have alcohol, it's like you're coasting at 80%, but you think, well, why would I coast at 80 when I could be feeling 120? And I think it's that feeling, and I think that's where it sort of creates that sort of just pace. It's kind of like you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, which is why, for me, I can't moderate alcohol.
I think you have the day you go sober, you don't realise that you're never going to drink again. That's almost like there's another anniversary for that day that you have that thought of, holy fuck, I can never drink again. Do you have that?
Yeah, I do. When I first went sober, that 1 year sobriety was my sort of goalpost. It's kind of like that's what I was working towards, because I knew that I wanted to publicise it, because I think I created a fair bit of conversation back home about just the lifestyle and the behaviour, and everybody kind of, to take 2 steps back, when you grow up in small towns, I think often there's a lot of branding that happens from your parents. So I think people look at you as an extension of that, and they've kind of already made a decision of what you're going to be like. So I think when I started to sort of fall into that similar lifestyle, when I had gone sober, I kind of wanted to make sure that I was really public about the success and obviously doing it. So it was kind of like once I hit that 1 year sobriety, I got to that point and I was like, now what? You know, do I just, is this a continuation? Do I sort of keep going? And I started to sort of lose that real sort of anchoring of, well, why did I stop? Because obviously I've built myself up into a position now where I feel fine. You know, I feel like I've done so much growth and so much development that I wouldn't slip and I wouldn't fall back into that.
I'm going to start wrapping up the interview, but I want to go back to, you know, the closeted Zeak living in a rural town. What advice or what's something you wish you could go back and tell him?
I think it's really difficult because I don't think that there's a huge amount of advice for survival. I think when you're in the thick of it, it's really hard for you to sort of visualize it. If you had asked me 10 years ago, would I be in the position that I'm in now? I'd say yes. I think as a bit of a trauma response, I kind of just convinced myself that this was temporary and where I'm at now is not where I'll be in 10 years. I remember it was probably a blessing that I grew up with a young mum, because it was the So Fresh early 2K CDs Beautiful. That were Gorgeous. Just absolutely blasting. So I know every breath, beat and lyric to Glamorous by Fergie, and I just used that as like a
life skill,
Yeah, it's kind of like I knew that there was a little bit more on offer than what I sort of had already. Yeah.
And Zeak, why is it important for you to stay sober now? What's in the future for Zeak?
For now that I've sort of fallen into a semi-professional sort of corporate job, and I can sort of feel that I'm on a bit of an upwards trajectory at the moment, and I kind of need to have that level-headedness and that sort of grounding to sort of continue with it. I think an end goal for me has always been kids. It's a massive sort of part of, it's kind of what I've been working towards for a little while. And I think, and it's not to take away from heterosexual couples that have infertility issues, but I think for a lot of queer couples, everything is looked at with a fine-tooth comb. Do you have the means to support it?
Completely.
You know, do you know, what's the cash flow? So I think for me to continue on that, I kind of have to just continue with the sobriety so that I can just,
I'm so grateful to have you on, and I'm so glad that we have finally met. And there will be, like I say, for a lot of interviews, like there is a Zeak out there who will be listening, and there is a Zeak out there who might have just relapsed as you did at the gym, you know, with tears in his eyes, and this will change lives. And I'm so grateful to have you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.